Sarah finishes unpacking her modest collection of demonstration equipment, a few training pads, hand wraps, and her well-worn gi with its faded black belt. The Unity Point Station's artificial gravity feels slightly lighter than Earth standard, making her movements feel unusually fluid. She'll need to adjust her demonstrations to account for this difference. Her quarters communication panel chimes, displaying a message from Earth's diplomatic court. Remember, Lieutenant Chen, this demonstration is a critical opportunity to normalize human physical culture within the cooperative. Emphasis on discipline and control is paramount. Sarah sighs, running through her mental checklist again. She's removed anything that might appear overtly aggressive. No breaking demonstrations, no weapons forms, not even light sparring equipment. Just basic movements from various Earth traditions, emphasizing form and philosophy over application. The quarters door slides open as Corporal Jackson arrives, carrying his own gear bag. You ready for this, Lieutenant? The hallways are buzzing with alien delegates talking about our demonstration. Talking or worried? Sarah asks, catching the subtle tension in his voice. Jackson shrugs. Hard to tell with some of these species. The Kaldorians keep flattening their neural fronds when I walk by. And the Thraxi delegation changed course to avoid the gym when they saw me doing my morning stretches. That's concerning, Sarah admits, checking her presentation notes again. We're supposed to be sharing cultural traditions, not scaring them. Maybe we should tone down the demonstration even further. Any more toned down, and we'll just be doing yoga. Jackson jokes, but there's an edge to his humor. I've been monitoring the station's information feeds. Did you know the Morrigan have no concept of physical conflict? They negotiate everything through pheromone exchanges. And the Vendali haven't had physical combat in over 40,000 years. Sarah contemplates this as she adjusts her uniform. 40,000 years without fighting. Hard to imagine. Earth's martial arts traditions go back thousands of years, but we've never had peace that long. Different evolutionary paths, Jackson observes, makes you wonder what humans might have become without all our conflicts. Their conversation is interrupted as Sarah's AI assistant projects a holographic schedule update. Lieutenant Chen, your pre-demonstration briefing with the Xenocultural Advisory Committee begins in 15 minutes. They've added representatives from 3 additional species and request clarification on the potential physiological impact of your demonstration. Sarah exchanges a puzzled look with Jackson. Physiological impact. We're just showing basic forms, not touching anyone. Maybe they're worried about getting sympathetic muscle strains from watching, Jackson suggests with a grin. As they gather their materials, Sarah's personal tablet displays a message from Ambassador Xoth, marked Urgent Clarification Required. The message contains a series of questions that leave Sarah increasingly perplexed. Will demonstrations include simulated termination techniques? Are pain compliance methodologies central to human martial philosophy? What percentage of human children survive basic combat training? Are observer safety distances of 15 meters sufficient? What exactly do they think we're going to demonstrate? Sarah mutters, quickly typing reassurances that no one will be harmed and that human martial arts training is primarily educational. As they exit her quarters, they notice a maintenance drone installing additional emergency medical equipment in the corridor leading to the demonstration hall. Station security officers from 3 different species track their movements with obvious caution. Lieutenant, Jackson says quietly, I don't think they're excited about our cultural exchange. I think they're preparing for a potential incident. Sarah watches as several alien delegates hurriedly move to the opposite side of the corridor as they approach. Something tells me we're about to learn as much about them as they are about us. Let's proceed with extreme caution. Dr. Lishvol's gelatinous form ripples as they adjust their translation notes. Consider our evolutionary context, Lieutenant Chen. The Morrigan evolved on a world where physical confrontation was impossible due to our malleable physiology. A strike simply passes through us with minimal effect. Sarah watches, fascinated, as the scientist demonstrates by pushing a tendril through their own semi-transparent body. We developed complex chemical and pheromonal communication. Instead, Lishful continues, our conflicts are resolved through chemical debates, exchanges of molecular arguments that influence group consensus. The concept of forcing compliance through physical means is disturbing to us. The crystalline hegemony representative flashes complex patterns that the translator renders. Similarly, our species developed from colonial organisms that shared consciousness. Physical conflict would harm oneself as much as others. We resolve disagreements through light pattern consensus algorithms refined over millennia. Sarah nods, beginning to grasp the fundamental disconnect. On Earth, our evolutionary history included predator-prey relationships, competition for resources, and territorial disputes. Physical conflict was built into our development. Yet you claim to have transcended this through practicing the very movements of violence. The confusion in the hegemony representatives' translated voice is evident, as their crystalline structures pulse with questioning patterns. Not transcended, Sarah corrects carefully. Transformed. Martial arts take the physical capabilities evolution gave us and refine them with purpose, discipline, and philosophical meaning. She notices Ambassador Xoth hovering near the edge of the conversation. Membranes vibrating in what Sarah has learned indicates deep thought. The Vendeli finally speaks. My species evolved from hive-dwelling filter feeders. Our ancient history contains no concept of individual combat. All threats were addressed through collective action. When we look at human history, we see an incomprehensible amount of individual-on-individual violence. The xenobiological team's leader, a Thraxi whose energy form glows with academic interest, projects data into the center of their circle. Human history records over 14,000 distinct combat systems developed across their planet. Most species develop none. The statistical anomaly is significant. Sarah feels increasingly defensive. Those traditions also preserved knowledge, created community, and taught discipline. They weren't just about fighting. A new delegate joins their circle, a Kaldorian whose neural fronds wave gently above their head. Perhaps this illustrates the fundamental philosophical divergence. They suggest, their melodic voice barely needing translation. Most cooperative species evolved toward eliminating physical conflict. Humans evolved toward controlling and channeling it. The observation deck has filled completely now. Sarah notices specialized environmental chambers along the perimeter containing species that cannot survive in standard atmospheric conditions. Even they have come to witness this unusual cultural exchange. There is a phrase in your historical records. The Kaldorian continues. The martial way begins and ends with courtesy. This suggests a paradox. Combat movements dedicated to non-combat values. Sarah nods, relieved at finding some common ground. Exactly. The physical techniques are just the beginning. They teach focus, respect, perseverance, virtues that extend far beyond fighting. Ambassador Xoth signals to the assembly as the scheduled time arrives. We should proceed to the demonstration area. The full delegation awaits. Their membranes vibrate in a pattern Sarah can't interpret. I must ask again, Lieutenant, you've prepared only the most basic, non-threatening movements. Absolutely, Sarah reassures them, completely missing the growing anxiety in the ambassador's harmonics. We'll start with foundational stances and basic forms, nothing that would even qualify as combat-ready in human terms. As they move toward the demonstration floor, Dr. Lishful pulses a private message to their research team. Prepare physiological stress monitors. I hypothesize we're about to witness why humans achieved spaceflight despite their evolutionary predispositions, rather than because of them. Sarah notices the tension rippling through the audience, but misinterprets it as interest rather than alarm. She continues her demonstration, transitioning into basic blocking movements. These techniques form the foundation of self-defense, she explains, her voice calm and measured. The goal is deflection rather than aggression. As she demonstrates a simple outside block, the cooperative's analytical systems project an overlay visible only to the alien delegates. The projection highlights the force and speed of Sarah's movement, calculating its potential impact against various physiologies. For many species present, the data indicates that even this basic block could shatter limbs or rupture protective membranes. Ambassador Xoth edges closer to the demonstration area, their membranes vibrating with increasing urgency. Lieutenant Chen, they interject, perhaps we could discuss the philosophical context before continuing. Sarah pauses, surprised by the interruption. Of course, but these movements might make more sense once you've seen how they flow together. She smiles reassuringly. Let me demonstrate a simple kata first. It's like a choreographed dance of techniques. Without waiting for a response, Sarah begins a fundamental kata taught to beginners. Her movements are deliberate and controlled, flowing from stance to stance with precision. To her, this represents the most basic form practice, something human children might learn in their first months of training. Through the embassy's monitoring systems, the delegates watch in stunned silence as their biological sensors interpret the demonstration. The Thraxi delegates' energy forms pulse erratically as their analytical systems calculate the destructive potential of each movement. The Kaldorians' neural fronds lie flat against their bodies, their species' instinctive response to extreme danger. A Morrigan scientist whispers to their colleague, their chemical signals indicating distress. The human moves with predatory efficiency. The force-to-mass ratio exceeds safety parameters for diplomatic contact. Sarah completes the kata, returning to her starting position with a respectful bow. She's pleased with the demonstration. Clean, controlled, and perfectly executed. She doesn't notice that several delegates have retreated further from the demonstration area, or that security personnel have moved subtly closer. That was a basic form from Earth's karate tradition, Sarah explains, still unaware of the growing alarm. It demonstrates how individual techniques combine into flowing sequences. Each movement has practical applications, but the practice itself teaches focus, discipline, and control. Ambassador Xoth's translator struggles to convey their harmonics, but the concern is evident. Applications. Against what? The question catches Sarah off guard. Well, against an opponent, traditionally. But modern practice focuses on self-improvement rather than combat effectiveness. This distinction is lost on many delegates. The hegemony representatives' crystalline structures flash urgent patterns that translate as the human freely admits these are combat techniques. Their historical records confirm these movements were developed specifically to damage other beings. Sarah realizes she's losing the audience. Perhaps a demonstration of practical application would help clarify. She suggests, gesturing for Corporal Jackson to join her. We can show how these movements work in context. Ambassador Xoth's membranes vibrate in patterns that the translation system interprets as extreme alarm. Application demonstration. Your briefing mentioned no interactive combat scenarios. It's not combat, Sarah clarifies, confused by the reaction. Just a demonstration of how the techniques function. We'll use controlled movements with minimal contact. As Jackson takes position opposite Sarah, the cooperative's threat assessment system silently elevates the security alert level. Environmental systems begin pumping calming pheromones into the chamber. Medical response teams move into standby positions. Sarah and Jackson bow to each other, assuming ready stances. We'll demonstrate a simple attack and defense sequence, Sarah explains. The movements will be slow and controlled. Ambassador Xoth's membranes vibrate so intensely that their translator momentarily malfunctions. When it resumes, their harmonic language translates as, what your species considers slow and controlled may still register as lethal intent to many present. The moment Sarah and Jackson begin their light, sparing demonstration, the amphitheater's atmosphere shifts from tense anticipation to outright alarm. The two humans move with what they consider to be extreme restraint. Telegraph movements, pulling punches, and maintaining controlled distance. But to the alien observers, they might as well be engaged in a death match. The cooperative's threat assessment eye immediately flags the demonstration as a potential security incident. A soft chime sounds as the containment field activates around the demonstration area, barely noticeable to the humans, but bringing momentary relief to the panicked delegates. Sarah and Jackson exchange a basic sequence, a slow roundhouse kick, easily blocked, followed by a counterpunch that stops well short of contact. To them, it's practically choreography, more performance than combat. The hegemony representative's crystalline structure vibrates at a frequency that disrupts nearby translation devices. When the system recovers, their message transmits throughout the chamber. The force analysis indicates the human's restrained kicks still carries enough kinetic energy to shatter the exoskeletal plates of 4 cooperative species. Dr. Lishful's gelatinous form ripples with scientific fascination despite their distress. Observe the response time, they note to their research team. The second human anticipated and countered the attack in 0.34 seconds, faster than most species' nervous systems can process danger. Sarah and Jackson pause, confused by the containment field and the commotion in the audience. Is there a problem? Sarah asks, her voice amplified by the chamber systems. Ambassador Xoth approaches the edge of the containment field, their membrane vibrations translated with unmistakable urgency. Lieutenant Chen, your demonstration exceeds safety parameters. Our analysis indicates you are operating at approximately 40% of human combat capacity, yet this still registers as lethal intent by cooperative standards. Sarah and Jackson exchange bewildered glances. 40%. We're barely moving, Jackson whispers. What do they think a real fight looks like? The Thraxi delegation's energy forms pulse with communication patterns too rapid for the translation system to process. Their security representative moves forward, their energy form projecting a simplified communication. The humans exhibit predatory movement patterns consistent with apex hunter species. Recommended action: terminate demonstration. Sarah realizes the situation is spiraling out of control. She raises her hands in a universal gesture of non-aggression and speaks calmly. We'll stop the physical demonstration immediately. There's clearly been a misunderstanding about the nature of these practices. The containment field remains active as a Kaldorian medical specialist approaches Ambassador Xoth. Their neural fronts communicate distress. Several delegates are experiencing acute stress responses. The Morrigan representatives have entered protective hibernation. 2 Galaran are showing color patterns associated with traumatic shock. For the first time, Sarah fully comprehends the impact of her demonstration. What she considered a watered-down, educational presentation has triggered the equivalent of a mass panic attack among species with fundamentally different evolutionary backgrounds. Ambassador, she says softly, I deeply apologize for the distress we've caused. We genuinely had no idea our movements would be interpreted this way. Ambassador Xoth's membranes stabilize slightly as they process Sarah's words. Your apology is accepted, Lieutenant. This incident highlights the profound differences in our species' approaches to physical interaction. They pause, membranes shifting to a pattern Sarah hasn't seen before. What is most concerning is not the demonstration itself, but the revelation that what you consider restrained and basic would qualify as elite combat proficiency among cooperative species. Security officers deactivate the containment field as medical teams move through the audience, attending to affected delegates. Sarah stands perfectly still, suddenly aware that even her casual movements might be misinterpreted. Perhaps, Ambassador Xoth suggests, we should continue this cultural exchange in a purely verbal format. As Sarah begins her explanation of Tai Chi's philosophical underpinnings, she notices a subtle shift in the amphitheater. Several delegates who had retreated to safety chambers cautiously reemerge. The Thraxi representatives, whose energy forms have been pulsing with alarm patterns, now display configurations suggesting analytical interest. In many Earth traditions, Sarah continues, consciously keeping her gestures minimal, martial movements became vehicles for philosophical and spiritual development. Tai Chi emerged from Taoist principles of balance and harmony with natural forces. She demonstrates a single, slow movement, the beginning of Grasp Sparrow's tail, her hands flowing through the air with deliberate grace. Unlike her earlier demonstrations, this movement triggers no security alerts. The cooperative's threat assessment (I) recategorizes the activity from potential combat demonstration to ceremonial movement pattern. The practitioner seeks to embody concepts like yielding to overcome force and finding strength in softness. Sarah explains. The circular movements represent the Taoist concept of yin and yang, complementary forces in balance. Ambassador Xoth moves closer, their membrane vibrations showing patterns of intellectual engagement rather than alarm. This appears contradictory, they observe. Movements developed for combat now serve philosophical contemplation. Sarah nods. Many human philosophical traditions recognize that challenges, even physical ones, can become pathways to deeper understanding. The martial aspect becomes a vehicle for exploring broader principles. Dr. Lischwald emerges fully from their protective chamber, their gelatinous form now displaying colors associated with scientific curiosity. Fascinating. While most species abandoned physical conflict as they developed philosophically, humans integrated combat movements into their philosophical exploration. The hegemony representative's crystalline structure emits patterns suggesting recalculation of previous assumptions. Our historical analysis indicates that species typically evolve beyond physical confrontation as a prerequisite for advanced philosophical development. Humans appear to have followed a different evolutionary path. Sarah resumes her Tai Chi movements, proceeding through the form with slow, flowing precision. She notices several Thraxi energy forms beginning to mirror her movements, their patterns flowing in harmonized rhythm. The practice becomes meditation in motion, she explains. Through physical discipline, the practitioner cultivates mental clarity and emotional balance. The external movements reflect internal development. A Kaldorian delegate approaches, their neural fronds now displaying patterns of cautious interest rather than fear. We have similar practices of moving meditation, though without the combat origins. The synchronized neural patterns appear comparable. Sarah sees an opportunity to bridge understanding. May I ask about your traditions? Perhaps we can find common philosophical ground despite our different evolutionary paths. The Kaldorian's neural fronds wave in an affirmative pattern. Our harmonic movement practices derive from herd synchronization behaviors. By moving in collective patterns, we achieve neural resonance and shared consciousness experiences. For the next 20 minutes, delegates from various species share their own traditions of movement, meditation, and philosophical practice. The Gaelaren demonstrate color-shifting patterns that induce meditative states. The Thraxi create flowing energy formations that enhance collective consciousness. Even the Morgan share how their chemical exchanges can create states of heightened awareness and philosophical insight. Ambassador Xoth observes the exchanges with vibrating membranes that the translation system interprets as thoughtful consideration. Perhaps we've been approaching this cultural exchange incorrectly, they suggest. We'd focused on the physical aspects of human martial arts rather than their philosophical integration. Sarah notices that the security personnel have relaxed their posture, and the medical teams have moved to standby status. For the first time since the demonstration began, she feels the tension in the amphitheater dissipating. Ambassador, she suggests, what if we approach martial arts not as combat training but as physical philosophy, a uniquely human approach to integrating mind, body, and spirit? The hegemony analyst continues projecting comparative physiological data into the center of the amphitheater. The crystalline being's light patterns shift to highlight specific metrics that draw murmurs of concern from the assembled delegates. Human bone density exceeds cooperative averages by 34%. The translator conveys. Muscle fiber recovery rates suggest damage sustainability significantly beyond standard parameters. Pain threshold analysis indicates functional capacity at injury levels that would incapacitate 86% of cooperative species. Sarah feels increasingly uncomfortable as her species is dissected like a curious biological specimen. The data presents humans as unnervingly durable and physically dangerous compared to the galactic norm. These are just adaptations to Earth's specific conditions, she offers, trying to soften the impact of the revelations. Higher gravity, diverse predators, environmental challenges. They shaped our evolution, just as your homeworlds shaped yours. The Kaldorian delegate's neural fronds wave in patterns indicating deep concern. Yet most species with similar evolutionary pressures self-destructed before achieving spacefaring status. Predator-derived capabilities typically correlate with aggressive expansion patterns incompatible with peaceful cooperation. Ambassador Xoth's membranes vibrate in what Sarah has learned to recognize as their equivalent of a diplomatic intervention. Perhaps this illustrates why human martial philosophy merits our attention. Their species retained physical capabilities that would have led others to self-destruction, yet developed frameworks to channel these capabilities constructively. Dr. Lischvol's gelatinous form shifts colors in what their species uses to indicate scientific insight. Consider the contradiction. Humans develop thousands of systems to maximize combat effectiveness, yet these same systems emphasize restraint, respect, and spiritual growth. Most species either abandon physical conflict or are consumed by it. Humans appear to have found a third path. The hegemony analyst's crystalline structure flashes with what the translator interprets as skepticism. Historical data indicates ongoing human conflicts despite these philosophical systems. As recently as 50 Earth years ago, humans engaged in large-scale organized violence. Sarah doesn't deny this uncomfortable truth. We're still evolving, still learning. Martial arts traditions represent our better angels, our attempt to transform evolutionary aggression into discipline and wisdom. We haven't always succeeded, but the aspiration matters. A Thraxi representative whose energy form has been configured in observation patterns now shifts to communication mode. Our preliminary analysis suggests human martial philosophy may represent an evolutionary adaptation unique among known species, the ritualization of combat potential into constructive cultural practices. Sarah watches the delegates process this perspective, seeing the tension between scientific curiosity and instinctive caution playing out across various physiologies. For species whose evolutionary paths led away from physical conflict millennia ago, humans must appear as walking contradictions, intellectually advanced enough for spacefaring technology, yet physically configured for combat in ways they find primitive and alarming. Ambassador Xoth addresses the assembly, their membranes now vibrating in patterns associated with formal diplomatic communication. The cultural exchange program exists precisely for revelations such as these, to challenge our assumptions about civilizational development. Humans appear to have integrated rather than transcended their evolutionary heritage, suggesting alternative paths toward advanced society. The Morrigan scientist, Dr. Lischvol, adds through their translation notes. From a xenobiological perspective, this merits further study. If humans developed philosophical sophistication while maintaining physical combat capabilities, perhaps our models of species development require revision. Sarah feels the focus of the room shifting from alarm at human capabilities to scientific and philosophical curiosity about human development. She seizes this opening. Instead of focusing on what these traditions were originally designed to do, perhaps we should explore what they've become. Systems for integrating mind, body, and spirit in ways unique to our evolutionary path. The specialized interactive chamber represents a marvel of cooperative engineering. Designed to accommodate beings from radically different evolutionary backgrounds, it adjusts its environmental conditions in real-time zones, allowing species that could never normally share physical space to interact in relative proximity. Sarah moves through the modified Tai Chi sequence she's developed over the past week, working closely with xenobiologists to adapt the movements for various physiologies. The chamber's central area maintains Earth-standard conditions for her, while specialized environmental zones radiate outward in concentric rings. In the nearest zone, 3 Vendali practitioners follow her movements, their membrane structures undulating in synchronized patterns. Ambassador Xoth, observing from the side, has become an unexpected advocate for the program after initial skepticism. The respiratory control aspects translate remarkably well to our physiology. Soph explains to a visiting diplomatic contingent, "What humans achieve through breath control, we accomplish through membrane oscillation frequency." In an adjacent section, Thraxi energy beings flow through the movements with natural grace, their forms shifting and pulsing in harmony with Sarah's guidance. Their natural fluidity makes them particularly adept at capturing the essence of Tai Chi's flowing nature. The energetic principles align with our natural state. A Thraxi representative communicates through the chamber's translation field. What humans conceptualize as chi, or internal energy, we experience directly as our fundamental composition. Even more surprising is the participation of several Gailoren, whose color-shifting skin now displays harmonized patterns of blue and green tranquility as they follow the movements. Their natural communication through color change has found unexpected resonance in the meditative aspects of the practice. Dr. Lishful monitors everything from a specialized suspension chamber, their gelatinous form containing complex analytical instrumentation. We're detecting remarkable neurological parallels across radically different nervous systems, they report. Despite our divergent evolutionary paths, the practice appears to activate similar centers associated with focus, emotional regulation, and cognitive integration. Sarah completes the sequence and observes her diverse students with a sense of wonder. When she arrived at Unity Point, she expected to simply demonstrate human martial arts. Instead, she's become part of something transformative. The development of a truly cross-species physical philosophy that bridges evolutionary divides. The most fascinating aspect, Ambassador Xoth comments as the session concludes, is how this practice highlights both our differences and our commonalities. The movements mean something different to each species, yet create shared experiences across physiological boundaries. Sarah nods, watching as the participants exit their respective environmental zones. On Earth, martial arts often transcended cultural and national boundaries despite profound differences. Perhaps they can do the same across species boundaries. The research initiative has expanded beyond anyone's expectations. What began as a diplomatic incident has evolved into one of the cooperative's most intriguing cultural exchange projects. Representatives from species who initially recoiled in horror at Sarah's demonstration now send regular delegations to learn adapted versions of Earth's martial arts practices. "We've been studying your philosophical texts," a Kaldorian researcher tells Sarah as they exit the chamber. Their neural fronds display patterns indicating intellectual excitement. The concept of the way or do in Japanese traditions parallels our own concept of harmonized path. Different evolutionary origins, yet convergent philosophical development. Sarah realizes that in their effort to adapt martial arts for alien physiologies, they've stripped away the combat applications while distilling the essence of the traditions, the focus on breath, movement, presence, and harmony. What remains proves universally valuable across species boundaries. Perhaps, Dr. Lishful suggests as they review the session's data, physical philosophy represents an evolutionary convergence point, a practice valuable to any sentient species regardless of origin. As Sarah observes the training hall from the instructor's platform, she reflects on the improbable journey of the past 6 months. What began as a diplomatic disaster has blossomed into something unprecedented in cooperative history, a genuine synthesis of different evolutionary approaches to mind-body philosophy. The Academy's newest innovation catches her attention, an adaptive translation matrix that renders the movements of each species comprehensible to the others. A Thraxi instructor's energy patterns are mapped onto holographic humanoid forms for non-energy beings. The membrane vibrations of Vendali practitioners are translated into visual and auditory patterns that other species can follow. The applications have expanded beyond our initial projections, Dr. Lishful reports, hovering beside Sarah in their specialized environmental field. The Diplomatic Corps reports a 32% improvement in cross-species negotiation outcomes when representatives practice adapted physical philosophy before sensitive discussions. Sarah watches as a group of Morrigan delegates, a species she once thought would never participate given their gelatinous physiology, flow through movements adapted to their unique form. Their chemical signaling patterns have been integrated into the practice, creating what they call molecular harmony exercises. The most surprising outcome, Ambassador Xoth comments as they approach, is the impact on cooperative security operations. The Joint Task Force has implemented adapted training protocols based on human martial philosophy. They report improved coordination across species with radically different physiologies. This development had been particularly unexpected. The very capabilities that had initially alarmed the cooperative delegates now informed training methodologies for their combined security forces. By focusing on the philosophical and disciplinary aspects, rather than combat applications, they've created protocols that enhance coordination without triggering evolutionary fear responses. You've created something remarkable here, Lieutenant. Xoth continues, their membranes displaying patterns Sarah now recognizes as indicating sincere appreciation, something that will outlast all of us. Sarah shakes her head. I didn't create this. We all did, by being willing to move past our initial misunderstandings and find common ground. The farewell ceremony exceeds all diplomatic protocols. Representatives from 17 species gather in the main assembly hall, each contributing elements from their own cultural traditions. The Thraxi create intricate energy patterns that dance through the air. The Gailaran display synchronized color harmonies that evoke profound emotional responses across species boundaries. When it's Sarah's turn to speak, she feels the weight of the moment. When I first demonstrated what I considered basic human martial arts, I unintentionally triggered alarm and confusion. Our evolutionary paths led us to see the same movements in fundamentally different ways. She looks around at the gathered representatives. Beings so different in form and origin that their ancestors could never have imagined sharing space, let alone philosophy. But in that misunderstanding, we discovered something profound. Despite evolving on different worlds under different pressures, we share common needs for harmony, for discipline, for integrating our mental and physical aspects. We've created not just a fusion of traditions, but a new understanding of how different evolutionary paths can converge on shared wisdom. Ambassador Xoth presents Sarah with a crystalline medallion, the cooperative's highest honor for cultural contribution. This is not merely for what you've taught us, Lieutenant Chen, but for what you've helped us discover about ourselves. As Sarah accepts the medallion, she realizes that her greatest achievement wasn't demonstrating human martial arts, but helping bridge the vast evolutionary divide between species. The simple combat moves that once horrified alien observers have transformed into a shared language that transcends biology.